the Hollywood Unapologetic Podcast with Orlando Delbert, Filmmaking Essentials.
Okay, Sergio Leone's 1966 film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. That's what we're unpacking today. And our goal here is, to kind of distill what makes it so important, why it still hits so hard.
Yeah, give everyone a shortcut, basically. We want to understand why this spaghetti Western, specifically, has had such staying power.
Exactly. So we've got articles on Leone's trademarks, the look of the film, cinematography, editing, Morricone's score, obviously.
Don't forget Morricone.
Never. And the history of spaghetti Westerns, the cultural side, historical context, even some listener thoughts thrown in.
So the mission is really to get into the skin of the movie, figure out what made it so defining back then, and, why it still resonates.
Precisely. So maybe the best place to start is, what even is a spaghetti Western? Just setting the scene.
Good question. Basically, it's a Western film, but made in Europe, usually Italy, by Italian directors, but set in the American West.
Okay, so not actually made in the American West, typically.
Not usually, no. And while there were European Westerns before, it was really Leone's A Fistful of Dollars in '64 that kind of lit the fuse for the genre as we know it.
That's the first of the trilogy, right? The Man with No Name.
That's the one. It really launched Leone. But interestingly, while that one kicked it off, many people actually consider his later film, Once Upon a Time in the West, from '68, to be his masterpiece.
Huh. Okay. And Leone wasn't just pulling ideas out of thin air, right? I remember reading about influences.
Oh, definitely not. A huge influence was actually Japanese cinema, specifically Akira Kurosawa.
Kurosawa, like Seven Samurai.
Exactly. His films Yojimbo and Sanjuro were basically the templates for Leone's whole Man with No Name trilogy with Clint Eastwood.
Wow, I didn't realize the connection was that direct.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. And that influence flows downstream, too. Think about Quentin Tarantino.
Oh, yeah, big time. You can feel the Leone vibe in his movies.
Totally. And he even used Morricone for the scores on Django Unchained and The Hateful Eight. It's like this chain reaction, Kurosawa to Leone to Tarantino.
It's a fascinating lineage. Okay, so let's talk about Leone himself. One source was a video essay looking at just one scene, right? A tavern scene.
Yeah, and it broke down his style into these, 7 key things.
7. Okay, what stood out?
Well, things like how actors just kind of pop into the frame suddenly. The way he slams together really tight close-ups and these huge wide shots.
That contrast, yeah. I always notice that.
Right. Then there's surprise, suspense building. Obviously, the music, we'll get more into that. Great dialogue, often sparse but memorable. And just this economy of storytelling. Pure cinema, the essay called it.
Pure cinema.
Yeah, telling the story visually with less reliance on just talk. What really struck me was how much tension he builds with. Well, sometimes with very little actually happening on screen.
It's the anticipation, isn't it?
Exactly. It's those long takes, the way characters are positioned, these slow reveals. It creates this incredible tension. And the pauses, the silences are LOUD.
It wasn't just him, right? The editing was key, too. Nino Baragli?
Absolutely, his editor. The essay described his work as almost mathematical. Very precise cutting.
So the editing isn't just tidying up, it's part of the construction, like building blocks.
Totally. It's fundamental to how the rhythm works, how the suspense lands, which brings us nicely to the overall look, the cinematography. What did your sources say about Tonino Delli-Colli's work?
Well, Delli-Colli is basically the guy credited with defining that spaghetti Western look. And again, influences from different places, American Western, sure, but also Kurosawa again, the framing, the pacing.
Interesting, that Kurosawa connection keeps popping up.
It really does. The goal seemed to be creating this canvas that felt huge, epic, showing the landscapes, but also incredibly intimate. Those close-ups on the faces, every line tells a story.
That mix of scale is so distinctive.
Yeah, and the camera movement reflects that. You get those really slow, creeping zooms and standoffs that just crank up the tension.
You feel like you're leaning in with the camera.
Exactly. Then these huge, sweeping shots of the desert, making the characters look tiny, isolated.
Emphasizing the environment, the harshness.
Right. And then in action scenes, it gets more dynamic, tracking shots, and of course, that incredible circling shot in the final duel.
The cemetery scene, iconic.
Totally. Compositionally, they loved isolating characters in the frame surrounded by empty space. Really drives home the loneliness, the moral ambiguity. And those extreme close-ups on the eyes. Intense.
Just the eyes telling you everything.
And that final standoff, the triangular setup, perfect visual storytelling of the deadlock. They weren't afraid of weird angles either. Asymmetry keeps you engaged.
And the light, How do they use light?
Often quite stark, harsh light, reflecting the world, I guess. Lots of natural light outdoors, long shadows. Inside, it's often low-key, more mysterious, shadowy.
Creates that mood.
Definitely. And the colors are mostly earthy browns, yellows, reds, very grounded in the desert. But then you get these pops, like the blue Union uniforms or the glint of gold that really stand out.
It's a very deliberate, very crafted look.
Yep.
Instantly recognizable. So we've mentioned him a few times, but let's properly focus on Ennio Morricone. His score is just inseparable from the film.
Oh, absolutely. You hear that music, you see the movie. And it's worth distinguishing, the original music from the soundtrack, which is everything.
Right. The score is Morricone's specific contribution.
Exactly. And he had this interesting background, not just film music, arranging even avant-garde improv stuff.
I didn't know that. So he wasn't just a traditional film composer.
Not entirely. And apparently for a fistful of dollars, the budget was tiny. So he got really creative using trumpets, but also gunshots, voices, whistling, whips, that twangy electric guitar sound.
Resourceful, making a virtue of necessity.
Pretty much. And what's really fascinating is how he worked with Leone. For these films, Morricone often wrote some music before they even shot the scenes.
Really? That's unusual. Usually music comes much later.
Right. But Leone valued the music so much, he'd sometimes actually time the scenes or hold shots longer to fit the music Morricone had already written. It shows how much of a partnership it was.
Wow. So the music wasn't just supporting the image, it was shaping it.
Yeah, in some cases. And obviously, the ecstasy of gold from this film, it's legendary. The fact Metallica uses it tells you something about its power.
Yeah, that's massive crossover appeal.
And he won a Grammy for the theme from Once Upon a Time in the West. He did so many other amazing scores too, like The Untouchables, Cinema Paradiso, even The Hateful Eight much later. But his work with Leone, especially on these westerns, it cemented his legacy.
It really defined the sound of the genre for many people.
Totally. And they even use different instruments in the main theme to represent the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like a little musical signature for each. It's genius.
Just masterful work. Okay, so thinking about the genre again, how does this film fit into the idea of a post-classical Western? What does that mean?
Right. So the classical American Westerns, say from the 50s, often had clearer heroes, themes of redemption, building civilization, that kind of thing.
John Wayne territory, maybe?
Kind of, yeah. But by the mid-60s, that model was fading a bit. The Italian Westerns came along with a different feel, more operatic maybe, more stylized, sometimes darker, definitely more cynical.
Less about heroism, more about survival.
Yeah, and greed. The driving force often isn't justice, it's money, capital. Less redemption, more cynicism.
And Leone's style fed into that.
Absolutely. Those quick cuts, the big contrasts between close-ups and landscapes, it felt different, more jarring maybe. One critic called the action discontinuous, which sounds negative, but maybe it actually adds to that epic, overwhelming feeling.
It breaks the mold of smooth, classical storytelling.
Exactly. And Leone was consciously playing with American Western imagery, wasn't he? Like filming Once Upon a Time in the West in Monument Valley, John Ford's iconic spots. Like he was taking the symbols and twisting them.
Almost commenting on the original genre.
Yeah. And some sources even connect the style to Italian peplum films, those sword and sandal epics, and even Italian horror. So it's pulling from lots of places, not just American Westerns.
A real melting pot of influences creating something new. Okay, let's zoom out further. The wider impact, cultural, political, historical. What did the sources say there?
Well, it hit a nerve culturally. Apparently, its sort of anti-war vibe made it popular with people protesting Vietnam in the U.S., a kind of cult following.
Interesting. Because of the cynicism about the war in the background?
Yeah, maybe the general disillusionment.
Yeah.
And the title itself, plus the characters. Nobody's purely good, nobody's purely bad. They're all shades of gray driven by self-interest. That complexity resonated.
Reflected a more complicated view of morality.
Right, and it really cemented tropes like the Mexican standoff, that three-way duel, and the morally ambiguous antihero. Those things are everywhere now.
You see that standoff structure all the time.
All the time. And just iconic lines, scenes, they get referenced constantly. The Simpsons, music videos, and Eastwood's Man with No Name, that archetype of the quiet, mysterious drifter. Huge influence.
What about the actual history, the Civil War setting?
That's a really interesting angle. It's one of the few big films, apparently, besides maybe Gone with the Wind, that doesn't just show the Union side. It gives a glimpse, maybe a skewed one, but a glimpse of the Southern perspective, the chaos of the war's end.
So not just a backdrop, but part of the texture.
Yeah. Now, there are inaccuracies. People point those out, like dynamite existing then, or the specific guns, the flag details.
Sure, historical films often take liberties.
Right. But it does show the brutality on both sides, including some Union cruelty to prisoners. It's not a simple good versus evil portrayal of the war.
Shades of gray again.
Exactly. And Tuco, Eli Wallach's character, while maybe playing into some stereotypes, is also presented as much more complex than the typical bandit role in older Westerns. Blondie, too. He's far from the classic noble cowboy.
Definitely not John Wayne.
Definitely not. One source called the film's take on the Civil War formalist, like it mirrors the starkness of war photography from the time, focusing on the grim reality.
Interesting take.
Yeah, and it digs into this idea of history or progress being built on, well, making money off people. Bounty hunting, slavery is in the background. It's pretty bleak.
That connection between violence and profit.
Right. And even the relationship between Blondie and Tuco, this uneasy alliance, you can read it as reflecting power dynamics shaped by that historical moment.
That's deep.
Yeah. And some even trace its influence further, like this idea of romanticizing defiance, finding echoes in Jamaican music or African youth culture. It's wild how far the ripples spread. It really contributed to seeing films and directors as forces shaping culture.
But really transcended being just an entertaining Western. Okay, we've touched on this, but let's nail down the shooting and editing styles again. That visual signature.
Yeah, it's that core contrast, right? Extreme close-up, then bam, huge wide shot, magnifies the person, then dwarfs them in the landscape, creates drama.
That push and pull.
And the pacing. He really draws out moments before action, builds that suspense, slow burn.
Makes the eventual violence more impactful.
Definitely. And the editing, as we said, that mathematical precision, especially in the climax. It's all about rhythm, building tension shot by shot, often without any dialogue. The cuts are the storytelling.
Visual rhythm.
Exactly. And those close-ups, again, not just faces, but maybe hands near a gun, small details that become huge in the moment.
Directing your eye, making you focus. It's such a controlled, distinctive style. Okay, last big question maybe. Why did Clint Eastwood stop making spaghetti westerns after this trilogy? It was so successful for him. Good question. Seems like a mix of things based on the sources. One big factor was money. Eastwood just got too famous, too expensive for the typical spaghetti western budget.
The price of fame?
Pretty much. And Hollywood came calling with bigger offers, more control. Plus, the filming conditions in Spain and Italy, apparently pretty rough. Intense heat, dust everywhere.
Doesn't sound glamorous.
No. And Eastwood supposedly disliked the post-sync dialogue process, where they dub all the voices later. Found it noisy and frustrating on set.
Understandable. He probably wanted to work back home, too.
Yeah, work in the U.S. system, maybe try different kinds of roles, different genres. And, you know, the whole spaghetti western craze itself started to fade by the mid-'70s anyway.
So the timing was right for him to move on?
Seems like it. His later westerns, like Hang 'em High or Unforgiven, you can still see the influence, that grittier style.
Oh, yeah, definitely in Unforgiven.
Right. But they were Hollywood films, made differently. Apparently there was even an idea for him to have a cameo in Once Upon a Time in the West, like his character gets killed off early on, passing the torch.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, but it didn't happen. Probably money again. Or
Right.
maybe Eastwood just didn't want to kill off the man with no name like that.
Probably wise.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a combination of money, ambition, change in trends. Makes sense.
Yeah, a natural evolution, really.
Okay, so what's the big takeaway for you from revisiting the good, the bad, and the ugly through these sources?
I mean, for me, it just reinforces what a game changer it was. Leone's style was so unique, so bold. Morricone's score, just iconic. And how it took the Western genre and flipped it, made it darker, more complex, asking different questions about morality, history. It just all came together.
Yeah, it's more than just the sum of its parts, isn't it?
Hopefully.
And hopefully for everyone listening, you've got a better sense now of just how much is going on under the hood in this film. The artistry of Leone, Delbert, Morricone, how they built this thing that still feels so powerful.
Yeah, it holds up incredibly well.
It really does. And maybe a final thought to leave people with. Think about that cynical view of progress, those morally gray characters. Do those themes still resonate today? How do they connect or not connect with our world?
That's a good question. And maybe notice Leone's influence in things you watch now. Those close-ups, the way tension is built.
Yeah.
It's definitely still out there. You can find more insights on navigating the entertainment industry and achieving success in Orlando Delbert's work, including his book, Pollyanna's Tear-Soaked Battlefields of Hollywood, a survival guide against the cynicism and the hypocritical, and of course, the Hollywood Unapologetic platform. And always remember, you are the key to your own success. You are the new Hollywood generation.
Be informed, be prepared, and most importantly, be great.
That's it. Be great. Good luck out there.
See you next time.